Careers. This is Mr. Toralba. Today I am going to go over your writing assignment to make sure that you complete it as expected. Our learning target is I can write a personal narrative in chronological order. And before you get started with the writing piece, make sure that you watch this video to make sure that you have every writing component within your draft. Now, the two things that I'm asking you to do is to either share your work through Office 365. You know how to do that. If you're using a piece of paper, then go ahead and write your draft and then at the end, take a picture of it and add it to your Dojo portfolio. Just to remind you, a small moment is what you're writing about, a personal narrative. So think of a small moment, something specific, something small that you have experienced this week. So far, tell us about your week at home and learning through digital. Think of an experience that has made an impact in you, in your life, maybe your daily routine. So once you identify that small moment, one thing, okay, one thing, then go ahead and start drafting your writing. So what we're looking for is for you to have a creative introduction that catches the reader. We talked about action leads, sound effect, question leads, and talking leads. There is also another suggestion here of three options of how you can start your writing. You can start with a question, you can start with an interesting fact, or a strong feeling. So depending on what you want to do, you can go ahead and choose one of those options as your starting point. Because this is a personal narrative, we're looking for transitional words throughout your writing as you're narrating your events or your event in chronological order, along with two to three small but specific details about your small moment. Include descriptive words to make sure that the reader is able to visualize your writing. And then, of course, finish up with a paragraph or a sentence that summarizes your small moment. Remember that we talked about how your closing can be in a way of asking a question, maybe giving an update, or sharing a feeling with the reader. As you're working on transitioning from your introduction into your um, details, then I have attached to your Dojo portfolio this anchor chart along with this chart to kind of help you with transitional words at the beginning of your narrative, in the middle, and then again at the end. So depending on what part you're working on, that will be the type of transitional phrase or word that you will use. So again, this will be in your portfolio in case you need. And just like every writing piece that we wrote in class this year, I would like for you to go ahead and use our checklist for you to go ahead and assess your writing. You're very familiar with this writing, with this rubric. As you know, every writing piece that we have written in class, we have assessed it with this rubric. And this will be done after you finish your writing entry. Now, here is a writing piece that I wrote, again, along with any piece of work that you do or any writing entry that you do for me. Make sure that you have a title for it and, of course, your name. Now, if you're using Office 365, your name is already attached to any writing piece that you complete, but still make sure that you write your name within the piece itself. Now, just like I mentioned earlier, we are looking for all the writing components within your drive. So the first thing that we're looking for is your introduction, making sure that you're using an action, sound effect, question, or talking lead, or any of the other suggestions that were given to you within this chart, within this visual. So going back to my personal narrative, this is what my introduction sounds like. I'll open my eyes slowly, confused. I looked at the clock and saw 7:47. My heart stopped, and I immediately jumped off my bed. I somehow ran across my room and went to brush my teeth in a hurry. Oh my goodness, I'm super late, I kept screaming as I tried to get ready for work. Then it hit me. I remembered that I didn't need to go to work. It was then that I realized that my routine had changed. I remember then that everything had changed and that I was not going to see my students. Today was the day without my students. So here's my introduction. I am clearly stating what I'm going to be writing about, what my small moment is about. As you can see in my title, A Day Without Students. So therefore, as a reader, I know that everything after the introduction will be about me having a day without my students. I started with an action lead. I opened my eyes slowly, a strong feeling, confused. So keep in mind that your catch lead and your introduction needs to match and needs to show the reader and not just tell the reader what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're thinking, what you're doing, what you're smelling. So think of your five senses and kind of show the reader what you're going through and what you're experiencing so the reader can visualize the same thing that you're experiencing. Now, I am moving on into to my details using transitional words here. At first, later that morning, eventually, and along with those transitional words or phrases, I'm using a comma. So keep that in mind as you're writing your own draft. So my details are the following. At first, I thought it was going to be an easy adjustment, something new, a new experience. But as the days go by, I'm realizing that seeing my students is something I love doing. Part of my routine is to welcome my students at the door. I try to do this every day. Sometimes it's hard as other things come up, but most days I like to welcome them with a hug or with a question like, how did your game go? Or perhaps, is your sister feeling better? Today was different. I was not going to stand at the door and see them walk into the classroom. Today was a day without my students. So again, within this detail, within my second paragraph, I am giving you some details of how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and what I'm going through to support my small moment, to support the day without my students. I also briefly want to mention that I'm indenting, okay? And to do that, all you have to do is tab once. Indentation is one of the components that we talked about when it comes to writing that you must have within your essay. So keep that in mind too. My next detail, as I'm transitioning to my next paragraph, I'm using the transitional word later that morning. Later that morning, when I finally walked downstairs to get ready to email all my Baker students for their first assignment, I started asking myself questions. I thought, what if they have issues logging into Office 365? I wonder, what if they don't remember how to get to my own? Every time I thought of a question, I came up with the same answer. Their parents are there to help. I know, just like me, parents are there to help. It was a day without my students, but for my students, it was a day with their parents. So again, I'm supporting my small moment. Keep in mind that your main idea needs to be explained. Your small moment needs to be explained in detail throughout your body. Okay. And then the last paragraph, of course, is going to be my closure, my closing, where I come up with either a question, a feeling, or an update as part of my closing paragraph. Still using a transitional word. And again, just keep in mind that you have this chart to help you out. I'm using the word eventually. Eventually, after sharing with my students their first assignment, questions started to come up. And just like in the classroom, I try answering as many as possible to make sure that this new learning experience transition as smoothly as possible. I must say that teaching online is definitely not the same as interacting and teaching my students in person. A day without my students has turned into my new routine. I hope my students are starting to feel confident and comfortable completing their daily assignments online. Yet, I hope that this new routine does not turn into a permanent day without my students. So here I conclude my writing, basically sharing a feeling or how I feel right now about not seeing my students and not having my students on a daily basis. Again, this is just a writing example showing you that you must have an introduction with a catchy lead, letting the reader know what you're about to write. You need to have 2 to 3 supporting details to support your small moment, along with the use of transitional words and indentation as you're typing, or if you're writing, you should have indentation too. And then, of course, closing my writing or finishing up my writing with a feeling. Again, your options are feeling, questions, or an update, just to let the reader know how you're doing now. As I mentioned at the beginning, make sure that you go ahead and assess your writing um, by using your checklist. So here we have our checklist or our rubric. Make sure that you go ahead and use this to assess the different portions of your writing. Just like in class, make sure that you go ahead and score one section at a time as a not yet, starting to, and yes, meaning no, I don't have it. Kind of is evident in my writing, or definitely yes, I can find it and show you where that part is within my writing piece. So remember that overall is completed after you assess every part, and then whatever you have the most of, that will be your overall score. For the lead, we are looking for a catch lead. I wrote the beginning in which I helped the readers know who the characters were and what the setting was in my story. So looking back at my personal narrative, if I look over my introduction, I should be able to see characters and somewhat of a setting that describes where and when this is happening. So I opened my eyes slowly, confused. I look at the clock and saw 7:47. So as a reader, I know this is happening or is starting in my bedroom, in my bed. I actually mention it here. My heart stopped and I immediately jumped off my bed. So I'm letting the reader know I am in my bedroom, in my bed, and if I read on, I can go ahead and tell that my writing is going to be about a small moment, a day without my students. So yes, I do have that writing component. So I will give myself a yes. And so on and so forth. You will go ahead and just read each section, one section at a time. For example, for the ending, you will go back and just read the end of your writing to make sure that you have that writing component and then score yourself. For spelling and punctuation, you will do the same each section. And then at the end, whatever you have the most of, then that will be your overall score. I hope you find this video useful. Again, your checklist, your transitional words, and your introduction options are all attached in your Dojo portfolio. Let me know if you have any questions.